everyone. I have, let me tweet this out. For the takedown of the Kyiv Independent, Kyiv Post, Kyiv, whatever that is. Kyiv. What is the new Kyiv? How do you spell
Independent?
What's the new spelling of Kyiv? It's K-I-Y-V.
It's K-Y-I-V. K-Y-I-V Independent.
K-Y-I-V Post. Kyiv Independent. I found it. Okay. Okay, so okay, somebody said EK47. Okay, Kami John, let's do. Okay, some good comments on YouTube should be read, of course. And it says, I shared this stream and endearingly dubbed Esha AK-48. I love that. Yep, I agree. I should change my name. So today we have Andre. He has a podcast. Andre, can you tell people a bit more about your podcast?
Yeah, the podcast is called Business Games. With AI is the full name, my initials. We started off talking about strategy in the business context because it was 2020, 2021 when it started. But of course, after the geopolitical situations, we've moved to talk about strategy in the wider context, and we're trying to teach people strategic and critical thinking with examples from the real world, which unfortunately brings us into the geopolitics and wars.
Yeah, it's a very good podcast. I'm a paid subscriber to it. So we'll put the URL.
Yeah, cool,
also, Andre, you're from Ukraine. Quickly tell us about your experience with Ukraine before we get started.
So, yeah, well, the reason why I switched the topic of the podcast is exactly because I was born there. I grew up in New Zealand since I was a teen, but I've spent the first 15 years of my life born in the Ukrainian Socialist Republic and later in the independent Ukraine. So I remember the change very well. I'm from the southeast, from the south of Ukraine.
Which city?
Currently, not gonna tell. The reason why I'm not gonna tell is because I still have.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So yeah. I just don't want to create issues for relatives or friends. But it's from the south. And what I remember is that growing up, I have not heard a word of Ukrainian spoken. We all felt like we were part of one large country. Wasn't really distinguishing ourselves from the other parts of the Soviet Union, and had spent a lot of time in Kyiv. We have lots of friends in Kyiv. I spent every summer in the Crimea, and didn't actually know who Bandera was. So that's the other thing. Didn't really care. But after the change, what I remember vividly is that all of our teaching of history had changed. The school textbooks had changed from. We were basically taught by the Canadian textbooks by the Ukrainians who had lived in Canada, and all of our new textbooks had been on history of Ukraine had been Canadian. And
I shudder to think of all of your dad there.
So yeah, so it's probably, like it depends on where you are in the political spectrum, but I'm pretty sure that it could be triggering for many people. And I remember that we were taught that all of our problems are from Moscow, and even to the point where it was highlighted to us the differences between the Ukrainian language and the Russian language, and so on and so forth. To the point where I actually became kind of a mid-core nationalist. Like we would tell jokes about killing Russians, and that's in the Russian-speaking part. We would, and those jokes would be encouraged, and that's what kind of what was taught at school. And I supported the Orange Revolution, so to speak, and so on. Is
that the one with Yushchenko?
Yeah, that's the one with Yushchenko. So that's in 2004. At that time, I was in Germany. I actually had a classmate from at the German university from Kyiv, so we were following everything that was happening. And then what happened, of course, like Yushchenko came to power, and it was peaceful, or like it was compared to Maidan 2014.
Yes.
The Maidan 2004 was peaceful. And then the first disenchantment, I guess, came like within the 6 months of like towards the end of 2004. Pretty much all of Ukraine turned on Yushchenko because he turned out to be completely corrupt and completely backtracked on all his promises and so on and so forth. So that happened, and then 2014 happened, and this is where for me personally it was a break with any sort of nationalism, because it went from joking about killing Russians to actually like a civil war and killing people.
Yep.
And I thought, well, no, I draw the line, like, and just for people to understand, having Ukrainian as a second language, I'm fluent, but it's a second language. It's probably language because I'm bilingual in Russian and English, and so it's probably a third language for me, but it's it's good. But I would argue with my parents that Ukraine needs to have one language because it's and it needs to be Ukrainian and stuff like that. So that was the part of my patriotism, so to speak. But after 2014, I said, like, this is fucked up. This is like, no. So I guess my eyes were opened to lots of stuff that was going on, and I also tell a story which I really like, where when we were looking for so our banker in the New Zealand bank, his second wife is from Crimea, and telling us the story that he was saying, I cannot speak to my colleagues about what's happening in the Crimea because I see once and they see the stuff that's on TV.
Yeah.
You can imagine what stuff was on TV in New Zealand, right? It's basically a carbon copy of all the Western typical, Russian aggression messages. And then he said, and then I call my parents-in-law and they're telling me completely different stuff. Yeah. So he said, I have to trust somebody. I trust my parents-in-law more than I trust the TV. And so I'm developing this whole, different understanding of what's going on in the Crimea, for example. And I was like, yeah, like, what can I tell you? So I had understood by then the kind of what happened, what was happening.
Let me quickly recap what happened.
Yeah, go.
So
that's the end of my story.
Okay. Right as the Maidan was going on in Maidan Square, right next door in Kyiv, there's something called Mariinsky Square. There was a bigger anti-Maidan protest, and people from Sevastopol had chartered all sorts of buses. But then they saw all these Nazis going psychotic and killing people, so then they got on the bus and came back. But in Horsen, these Nazis actually beat them, they torched one bus, killing everyone. The other bus, they beat everyone up, and it was like tortured them and stuff like that. And so then the remaining buses that came back to Sevastopol, well, it was actually the Ukrainian army who wasn't actually told this whole Maidan thing was going on. So they're the ones who shut the border, they created a blockade of Crimea. And then Crimea had a referendum where they decided to secede from Ukraine. And one more thing is, if Russians were already involved, why would they not stop Maidan? Like, they would have stopped Maidan as opposed to, and this was very grassroots. So after that, Ukraine was very close to falling apart. Like, Kharkiv made an independent republic, Donetsk, Lugansk, and Odessa was getting around to it. So but since the far right accession to power and the use of they immediately dissolved the Berkut, which was the old police, and then they put in like private sector kind of people in the police, and so it's all everyone with guns in Ukraine basically is a Nazi. Do you agree?
Not in 2014. It had escalated. So there were a lot of people in the So what people need to understand is, and I go back to Western sources, right? Because if I cite, God forbid, if I cite Russian sources, people.
Oh yeah. I'm brainwashed by Russian propaganda. Yeah. No, you have to cite Western.
So,
that's what I always do.
So I cite Western sources. So there is an article in Washington Post from 2014. It was before, I think, January 2014, and they were basically highlighting. The article was called something like "The One Map You Need to Understand the Ukraine Situation."
Let me see if I can find it while you talk. Go ahead.
Yeah. So and they basically highlight the part of the population that voted for Yanukovych, the part of the population that voted against Yanukovych, and then people who were anti-Maidan and people who were pro-Maidan. And they also highlighted where there had been takeovers of the municipal buildings and SBU buildings and I think some military buildings. And that happened in the West. So even before the so-called separatists in the East took up arms, the Western guys, so the guys from the right sector, they had taken over the municipal buildings and SBU buildings, so the secret, the secret police, I guess. And they had gotten hold of guns, and then they went to Kyiv. And so, if anything, like that separatism, that coup started there. The other thing that one needs to understand is that there were more people, and that is traceable from the Ukrainian media at the time.
I can show you videos. There were definitely more people in the anti-Maidan protest than the pro-Maidan protest.
And so Union, the Ukrainian, a massive Ukrainian media network, had run and it was not pro-Yanukovych. So they had run a survey, and they found out that there were 42% supporting Maidan and 47% supporting anti-Maidan. So even with the couple of percent standard error, you still get statistically significantly more people against the Maidan than pro-Maidan. So whenever somebody says that, oh, it was a popular uprising, it fucking wasn't. It was a minority. And
on top of it, what happened is that, okay, so in January, Yanukovych had passed increases to pensions and minimum wage. And actually, based on the IMF deals, IMF made in April with the interim government, they made them sign an agreement where they agreed to take down price control. So every good the cost of every good just ballooned up. Mm-hmm. And they also rolled back the minimum wage and pension. So no logical human being is going to be like, I want lower pensions and I want lower pensions and lower wage so I can wave around the Nazi flag.
Yeah, and on top of that, the Russian deal was giving Ukraine a gas at 30% discount, which is really important because a lot of Ukrainian industry runs on Russian gas. And so, by all accounts, like purely from the economic point of view, Russian deal was better. And they actually wanted to go, like if you listen to the to what Azarov had been saying, who was the prime minister at the time, and so on, they actually wanted the European deal. They did everything possible to get the European deal. They even asked the Europeans but they calculated it, and it would cost them a ridiculous amount of money to implement that in all of these things, and the rollbacks of the social payments and other stuff. And they went to the European Union and said, look, we would love this, but it's going to cost us an arm and a leg. We don't actually have that in our budget. Could you help us? And the European Union said, no, you do whatever you like. And then Russians were offering huge discounts on gas and just a better economic deal. And so they had to go with the Russian, even though that was a least, for them personally,
reluctant.
Preferred. Yeah. So, there was lots of other stuff around the IMF and the World Bank. The other thing is that they were putting pressure on Ukraine to not only make changes structurally, but deregulate a lot of the economy. They wanted,
and also so Ukraine since 2001 had a bar on how much land you can sell to foreign companies.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
None. That was none. So they had a moratorium on sale of the Ukrainian land, but the West had been putting pressure on Ukraine to open that up. They finally managed that. I actually have a podcast episode that I'm sitting on editing with the person who investigated the situation. He was from a San Francisco, Oakland Institute, which is in Oakland around San Francisco. So they investigate various issues. One of their reports, not the Ukraine one, but one of their reports had been on John Oliver show. So they're visible. And I read the reports. The reports are really good. So basically, he had been investigating this issue around the agricultural land. Finally, they managed. Everybody in Ukraine was against it. People took to the streets. When Zelensky came to power in 2019, they tried to push it through, but people took to the streets. But then COVID happened, and there was a lockdown. And during the lockdown, when nobody could go and protest on the streets, that's when they passed the law rolling back that legislation from 2001 and allowing finally the foreign interests to come into Ukraine. And the foreign interests in Ukraine, from the agricultural point of view, these are basically North American and Western European companies.
Monsanto, basically.
Yes, also Goldman Sachs, and there's like I think, a whole bunch of things I don't recall readily, but I also believe something like the Harvard Fund or the Endowment Fund and stuff like that. So there's basically a lot of financial companies from the West taking over Ukrainian agricultural land.
Yep. Okay. So with that, let's begin. So Kyiv Independent is basically an NED-backed outlet. So National Endowment for Democracy, what they do is they promote Okay. So, right after Maidan, what the first thing the U.S. did is USAID flooded Ukraine. And so in order to promote independent media, they give all these like weird media channels like lots and lots of money. And one of their correspondents actually fought with Azov. Like he was not just a correspondent, but he was like a fighter with Azov during the Civil War.
Nice.
Yeah. So they made this propaganda video where they were like, like anyone who accuses Bandera, like for me, so in World War II, there are two sides, Hitler and Stalin. Anyone who was on Hitler's side to me is a Nazi. Do you agree?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I actually thought up until recently, last year.
Sorry. Yeah. So there's a problem. If there's a problem with the Twitch stream, I can't fix it right now, but I will upload the video onto Twitch after this. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, go ahead.
So I thought that we, collectively, in general, everywhere, not only in the West, but like across the universe, that we had come to, one conclusion. In general, I would say there is no like good side, bad side, right? Because I usually go like
for World War II, in my opinion.
Well, that's the thing. I always thought that we agreed that Hitler was bad. It's like,
Yes, he was definitely bad.
Yeah,
very bad.
So and people who who were like enthusiastically on his side. I'm not even talking like reluctantly. It was like enthusiastically on his side. I think that pretty much covers them in this not good is what I would say.
Worse than that, so the Banderaites were so out of control that I've quoted this on my articles before. German Wehrmacht officers complained to Himmler about how brutal they were towards Jewish people. So when it's not even anyways, but see here, they've made this like whitewashy video where basically anything that is the truth is labeled as Kremlin talking points. Well, if it is, yes, Kremlin does say this, but they're also telling the truth in this regard.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get started.
Resistance to Russia's full-scale invasion has astounded the world, but not Ukrainians themselves. The resilience stems from a centuries-long fight for freedom.
Okay, so first thing is let's talk about how Ukraine united with Russia. In 1650 something, there was an agreement called the Pravoslav Agreement, where Ukrainian Cossacks went to the Tsar and actually asked him to protect their lands from invaders from Poland and Lithuania.
So
And then,
can I just jump in there? I've recently, and so my journey since that thing, right? And as I said, when I was growing up, I didn't know who Bandera was, but I had read like a lot of stuff and started getting interested in the history, because it was like we were taught something, one thing in the 80s, then we're taught something different in the 90s. Like, what is the truth? So I started. I would like to correct. I know Ukrainians like saying that was Ukraine. That wasn't Ukraine. So I have come across the version and with evidence, and I tend to believe it, that Cossacks, by their nature, they were basically free people, and
I thought they were just like warriors, kind of like paid warriors. So they were from all ethnicities.
No, they got the paid warriors. They became paid warriors after. So what you need to understand is that the Ukraine of that time was after the Mongols came over and basically subjugated Kyiv. Most of Ukraine is steppe, and it was always a land of nomads. So there were nomads going like up at that. There weren't really any stable villages, because you cannot defend them. So you're always like under the attack. So they weren't defensible. So the region of the northern Black Sea steppes and also Donbass had been sort of a no man's land. And what happened was that there were people from all over. So you had the Moscow principality that was taking on, before it became empire, it was a Moscow principality, but it was growing. It was fighting with the various Khanates like Kazan and so on. And then you had the Ottoman Empire and the Crimean Tatars. And by the way, Crimean Tatars made a living out of capturing Slavic women and children, selling them to slavery for the Ottomans. So that's what they were there for like hundreds of years. And then you also had the Polish kingdom, and then occasionally like Polish-Lithuania and Rzecz Pospolita and so on and so forth. And they all made peasants pay taxes in some shape or form, and
through labor, right?
Yeah, and also conscript them into military service. People who did not want to do this, they ran into the steppes. They ran away into the steppes, kind of banded together. And the word Cossack means, it derives from the Turkish, and it means a free person. And a free person from what? Well, from paying taxes. So you had Turkish nationals, you had Poles, you had all sorts of Slavs, like from call them whatever, Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainians. Like, where does one end and the other begin? Nobody can tell. There were also ethnically Jewish Cossacks. What brought them together is they did not want to pay taxes, and they got together. And what did they do? They did some agriculture, but they also did effectively piracy. So the closest analogy also of that time to the Cossack state was the pirate kingdom of Tortuga.
I don't know anything about that.
Well, Pirate Kingdom of Tortuga, even if you watched like the Pirates of the Caribbean.
I didn't.
Yeah, okay. So
go ahead.
I guarantee you that many of your listeners have watched.
I know they have.
It's basically just Pirates of the Caribbean were, again, at around that time, 1500, 1600. By the end of 1600, they were all wiped out. But for like a glorious 100, 150 years, they didn't pay wages to anybody. They banded together. It was a purely democratic entity, but also kind of pirates. So the Cossack state,
they reminded me of. They seem a little bit like the Maroons in Jamaica too.
Could very well be. Don't know much about that, but
Okay, they were just slaves who ran away and banded together and formed their own military. And basically, what they did is they pirated. They got their wealth by pirating ships.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what Cossacks were. The original when they became like when Khmelnytsky got them together into some sort of a state. Actually, originally their language, they adopted the state language as Polish. Because those lands were, they were under Poland. Like a lot of them were under Poland for a long time, and they were they were fighting because they were effectively fighting not to continue not paying taxes, to be free. And so they were fighting against the Ottomans, against the Tatars, against the Poles, and against Russians. But at some stage, as the powers kind of started growing, the no man's land started getting occupied, and they had to make a choice. And they, in fact, like under Khmelnytsky, they begged the Russian Tsar for the protectorate because they figured out that if they have to go with anybody, I guess they decided to go with the Moscow state, maybe on the religious grounds. But there were, as I say, there were all sorts of religions amongst Cossacks. There were Jewish Cossacks and so on and so forth. So that maybe wasn't the major point, but maybe it was. In any case, yes. So the Treaty of Pereyaslav from 16-something or other.
50-something.
Okay, there we go.
1654, I think. Don't quote. It's
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that happened. And now, if you look at, I will send you a really nice dynamic map that you can put in the links as well, which is just basically a map of what is modern Ukraine throughout the 1,000 years. And people will see, it's in Cyrillic, but whatever, people will be able to see.
I was right. It was 1654. Wow, I'm so good at this. April to 6. Okay.
So yeah, and that part wasn't like, when it's compared to the territory of the modern Ukraine, it was like a quarter, a third.
Yeah.
I don't know. It wasn't. It was just a little chunk.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Cossacks then, because it wasn't just these Cossacks. They were Cossacks that they were basically like hosts. If you think about it, they were like private military companies. And there were many of them. Some of them basically decided to go, and they became like on the payroll of the Poles, of the Polish kingdom. Some of them became on the payroll of the Ottomans, actually, and many of them got on the payroll of Russia. And then they also started kind of moving to all sorts of parts. They were sent all over the place. That's like in the Northern Caucasus and the even to Siberia. But the point is, Ukrainians love claiming that these are Ukrainians. These are not. They're ethnically very diverse bunch.
Yes.
They just happen to be on this territory. Yeah. Okay. Enough of this.
Oh, okay. And then the thing is that there's one group of basically after like Napoleon invaded, a lot of these Cossacks really did a good job of pushing him out. And in reward for that, they were given like really big farmlands with the slaves, of course, in the Ukrainian region, because Ukraine has like a lot of fertile farmland, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue. That's just a stupid animation. Okay, hold on. Let's just okay. Okay. So I know Bandera's in the middle, and the other one, I forgot his name. But who's the one on the far left?
No idea.
Okay.
I suspect that it could easily be like Stitsko or something like that. I'm not sure.
I think one of them is Simon Petlura. Let me just double check. No, it's okay. I can't find it. Okay. Okay, maybe. Okay, but the middle one is Bandera. Evil Engels.
The two world wars left a stain on nationalist ideologies in Western Europe, but things developed differently.
Okay, hold on. Why did the world wars develop a stain on the nationalist movements in Europe? Is because they committed genocide. Okay, let's continue.
In Ukraine.
Okay.
Ukrainian nationalism gained prominence in the late 19th through early 20th centuries as part of the drive for cultural revival, independence, and future state building. Contrary to decades-long Russian propaganda, Ukrainian nationalism is seen by Ukrainians as a positive, with the main
Okay, so let's actually say, okay, so Ukrainian nationalist movement, okay, there was some in the late 1800s, but they really became prominent after the Bolshevik Revolution because the very first thing, so Ukraine had a lot of farmlands, which means a lot of people had, okay, so Tsar Alexander definitely abolished serfdom in 1860, but serfs had to buy their freedom, like work hard and buy their freedom. And eventually it was kind of like in the US where they kind of had you know how it was back to slavery through sharecropping. They had just different structures, but it was the same life for the peasants. So then after the Bolshevik Revolution happened, the Bolshevik Revolution, the first decree was the decree on land, bread, and freedom. And instead of like sharing their land, they wanted to secede. And that is the biggest part, is that they did not want to free their slaves. Like they wanted to have slaves, basically.
emphasis being on its fight for freedom, democracy, and rights. But let's start from the beginning.
Okay, as I was saying, okay, this is Denikin.
The February Revolution of 1917 in Russia gave an impetus to national movements in Ukraine.
Okay, not exactly. The February Revolution was basically the Tsar stepping down and appointing his cousin. And things were really bad because of World War II. And World War I. And basically, in the Ukraine area, it was Anton Denikin, who was completely armed and paid by the West in order to, basically in order to keep the old status before the revolution, where 88% of the population was illiterate. Life expectancy was 32.
Most of which was part of the Russian Empire.
Just pause for a second.
Go ahead.
So there are also a couple of other key figures in that. So the one that you mentioned, then there was, I believe, was it Skoropadsky, or there was some hetman who used to be basically one of the high-ranked officers of the Russian Empire, and after the revolution, obviously, like Mannerheim, who
Finland's,
so he buggered off to Finland and then became the whatever leader, president, or but he was also a one of the high-ranked generals in the Russian Empire under the Tsar. So was this hetman. So he set up hetmanat, and yes, they were also supported by the West. So I think there were several people who were supported by the West. There were also a lot of people who were I think Petlura was just kind of a bandit running around doing stuff. There was what's the other guy's name? There was an anarchist, a socialist anarchist. Makhno. Yeah.
Okay.
So he was, and then there were also actually Bolsheviks in Ukrainian Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
So there were many different. It was like there was a true. And you're right. There were people for the status quo, and then there were people who were actually like power to the people kind of movement. So I already, whenever I hear something like, oh, there are these national movements and there were Ukrainians against the, Bolsheviks or against the Tsar, it's like, no, that's bullshit, because there were so many different interests who were pulling in different directions. Anyway, sorry, continue.
No, it was a deeply unequal society. In such unequal societies, you're going to have many different interests, like some of them wanting to keep status quo, some of them wanting to you know what I mean? It pulls.
Empire at that time. In March, a staunch advocate of Ukrainian self-governance, historian Mikhailo Hrushevsky, was elected as the head of the first Ukrainian parliament.
Okay. Remember, this was the okay. So this was also before the Bolshevik Revolution. It was in March. So like people who could vote was very limited. It was not like everyone, and it was mostly and it was also it was not basic. It was not a representative of popular will, basically, because majority of the conditions was horrible. Like I was just in the library a few months ago reading about this. There's a factory in Kyiv that actually required workers to work 20 hours a day. I mean, things were just very, very brutal there.
Don't play this. Do you see Crimea anywhere on that map?
I don't.
Exactly. Anyway, continue.
Good.
The Central Rada. The new government in Kyiv was supported by a 100,000-strong demonstration on the city's main square. Nearly a year later, amid political turmoil and the growing threat from Russia, the Central Rada declared an independent, free, and sovereign state of the Ukrainian people.
Hold on.
Days later, the Bolsheviks entered Kyiv.
Okay. What happened? Okay. So now, this is, by now, the Bolshevik Revolution had, in 1918, so now the West is panicking because England and America wanted Russia to have a second front against Germany, and when Russia checked out of the war, they're panicking, and they are, so right after that, like 14 countries invaded whatever used to be Tsarist Russia at that point. And they were like, there was a free flow of arms from everywhere in the West with lots of money. So even if they failed to mention that it used to be part of Tsarist Russia, and then only because they were opposed to the reforms by the Bolsheviks because it threatened their material interests, did they come up with this declaration.
Yeah. And also, one of the things that was happening at the same time was that Germans and Austro-Hungarians were running around. Interestingly enough, there were parallels to the modern kind of grain deal because they were extracting lots of grain from Ukraine. The other thing is just tell. One of the things I try to teach people on the podcast, right, is just like switch on your brain. Like these guys are presenting the situation as if, yes, the sort of plucky, independent Ukraine against the big bad Russia, and there's this red scare coming. Okay, it's 1918. It's January 1918. The October Revolution took place in 1917, in October 1917.
Old calendar.
The Bolsheviks were not like there was a civil war inside Russia, right?
Yeah.
In order for the Bolsheviks to mass such a power, it's like, think about it. Do you think that there were no people support inside Ukraine for the Bolsheviks? Like
there was a lot because Ukraine.
That's my point. How would the Bolsheviks have taken over Ukraine if there had not been a mass support for the Bolsheviks inside Ukraine? It wouldn't have happened. The only reason why they succeeded is that they were on board with this.
Exactly. And that's the thing about it, is that when you look at the economy, Ukraine had a big agricultural economy, and that means a few people at the top owning everything, and then you have lots of people like just in utter squalor. So everyone who was in utter squalor basically were supporting the Bolsheviks. And so when there are like 10 of you and 1 million of them, of course the Bolsheviks are going to win. And and the mismatch is that literally the reason why it's a symbol is hammer and sickle is because these people were peasants. They didn't even own the clothes on their backs. But they fought with their superior numbers, and that's why they were able to win, not because of superior weapons.
Kyiv, forcing the Ukrainian government out. As the Bolsheviks were marching on Kyiv, over 500 Ukrainian soldiers and students attempted to slow down their advance.
500.
Yeah.
500. So the Bolsheviks were probably 10, like whatever the population of Ukraine, just 500. It shows you that wasn't popular.
Outnumbered, many of them fell in the Battle of Kruty. Still, they were able to halt the Bolshevik advance, buying the Ukrainian People's Republic precious time to sign a peace treaty with the Central Powers. With the help of new allies, Germany and Austria-Hungary, Ukrainians were soon able to liberate Kyiv and regain all of their territories. But the Bolsheviks soon renounced the peace treaty, proceeding with their plans to conquer Ukraine. Western Ukraine proclaimed its own independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It later united with the Ukrainian People's Republic, but this union collapsed. Among the key problems Ukrainians faced at the time was the lack of unity and sometimes contradictory visions for the Ukrainian future.
Lack of unity means there's no popular consent. And Simon Petlura was basically a terrorist, for lack of a better word, right?
Yeah, it's an arsehole.
Yeah, and what happened is that, okay, so Poland used to be part of Tsarist Russia, but then France basically paid, Pilsudski, who was like very close to being, he was a total fascist, actually. In fact, Poland started its first like anti-Semitic pogroms 10 years before Germany. And then they went on this intense campaign of Polification, which means killing everyone who's not Polish. Anyways, during that time, it was in around 1920, Poland invaded that area that is whatever known as Ukraine, and then the Bolsheviks fought with Poland to push them out. And so they're kind of forgetting about that Polish invasion, and it was very brutal at that point, right?
Even within the same government, Russian Bolsheviks again captured Kyiv, while Poland occupied Ukraine's Galicia, including Lviv. In 1921, the Peace of Riga secured Western Ukraine for Poland. In turn, Poland recognized the rest of Ukraine as Soviet. Ukrainians were again split between different polities. The brief taste of independence, however, was a game changer for Ukraine. Despite the defeat, many Ukrainians did not lose hope, choosing to fight for their state underground and in exile. Organized Ukrainian nationalism emerged in Prague, where many fled from persecution by Soviet and Polish authorities.
Okay, so why were they being persecuted by the Soviet authorities? Because they were, okay, a lot of these people were former members, there were the White Army, and the White Army, for lack of a better word, they kind of like the KKK. They would like form utter terror on villages and stuff like that. So that's why they were, and with Poland, these people actually committed many, many acts of terrorism. In fact, Bandera was jailed in Poland because they executed like an ambassador or something like that inside of Poland.
So the other one, I've just sent you a couple of links you could put up. So one is that YouTube video of the Ukrainian lands. So the way that they're presenting, right, is they're saying, oh, Ukraine was this unified thing and then it was separate. It's like, no, Ukraine was never a unified thing in the territory that it is now. It was never, for 1,000 years, it was like the West was always under Poland. The Poland didn't just kept, like, there were Polish people living in Galicia and in Berlin. They were destroyed, Poland, as a state, or for some time, and they were divided between the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires. But then they came back and they sort of, recaptured there. And the thing is, they had been in that region for 700 years, while the East was under the Golden Horde, then the Ottomans, then just a whole bunch of and then eventually under Moscow. So
under St. Petersburg back then. The capital used to be St. Peter,
yeah, well, originally Moscow, but then Peter the Great moved it to St. Petersburg. Yes.
Yeah.
So so the point, like, if they're trying, and that's the thing, they're substituting this sort of half truth and making it, there was no understanding of who Ukrainians were on that territory
until the national question, which was decided by the Bolsheviks.
Yes. And so the second link I've sent to you is to a work which is called The Fascist Kernel of the Ukrainian Genocidal Nationalism. And that's a work by a German Polish historian who is at the Freie Universität Berlin. His name is Gregor Srosolinsky-Liebe.
Oh,
and
I've heard of him before.
Yeah, so he's admittedly like the foremost Bandera expert in the world. And so the thing about again this split, the reason why they buggered off and why this whole nationalism started in the this fascist style Ukrainian nationalism started in the Western Ukraine under the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Poland, is because the rest of it was Soviet, and they were actually like they bought into the Soviet rule, and they were quite pro-Soviet, so they couldn't have developed a fascist style nationalism. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, and in the West there was actually a lot more East, there was more industry and there was a lot more proletariat, so it would have been a lot harder for that. And if you read my article, Economy of Evil, we know that fascism is like whenever capitalism collapses, fascism comes in to save the wealth of the already rich people. So it's a very reactionary movement. And it only exists to kind of impose status quo upon whenever there's like a change of power structures. Okay, let's continue. Thank you. Please super chat.
In 1920, senior officers of different Ukrainian armies, led by Yevhen Konovalets, established the Ukrainian Military Organization, the UVO. It brought together veterans and young Ukrainians who yearned for a united, independent state.
It brought together mostly people who used to be part of the White Army. And go ahead.
And the Austro-Hungarian army. That's the other thing.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
These guys were actually the original ones before Bandera. Bandera was like a second wave. He was young back then. It was originally by Melnik, and then the OUN split into OUN-B and OUN-M. Yeah. So the Melnik and the original Ukrainian nationalists, they were all ex Austro-Hungarian military.
Exactly. And so they had a lot of like being in the Austro-Hungarian military meant you got a lot of like privileges that would not survive if they were in the Bolshevik Empire, in the Bolshevik Soviet, not empire.
They hoped for a popular Ukrainian uprising on both Polish and Soviet-occupied sides. The UVO built a resistance network, mainly in Galicia, where Ukrainians were increasingly discriminated against by the Polish administration. The organization was also active in Kyiv and had military offices abroad. Some UVO members were arrested and executed, but this did not stop the resistance. The UVO's tactics included acts of sabotage and assassination attempts on Polish officials. Its members also organized propaganda campaigns for Ukraine's independence. The UVO played a key role in the political...
Just already tells you, because they were putting like all of these things in the Polish occupied. So why? Because in the Soviet part they were not supported. So that's
exactly
to present Ukraine as this unified thing when it wasn't. Like Galicians had been away from everybody else for 700 years. Like even logically, if you develop a culture 700 years removed from the other, it's like you are no longer that. You're something different.
Exactly.
And so was this movement really strong in Galicia?
Yes.
Galiciana. Yes, it was. And that's where it was. And there was not much else anywhere else. Like one
Exactly.
office in Kiev they had. Yeah.
Yeah, because the Soviets were incredibly popular because they literally made people's like life improve like that. Like people suddenly could send their children to school instead of having them to work 12 hours in a like just that. Yeah.
Political evolution of Ukraine's new generation of freedom fighters. Having merged with the student nationalist organizations, the UVO grew into the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, or OUN. The OUN was a radical right-wing movement of integral nationalism that was thriving in Europe at that time.
Okay, that should explain what their opinion on, say, Jews were.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what we'll realize is that after 1933, the Abwehr was created, and they had been like getting lots and lots and lots of support from the Abwehr, which is like it's like the secret service of like Nazi Germany.
Yep.
Okay.
Its members believed that establishing a state demanded resolute, ruthless actions, similar to those of their enemies. The OUN organized...
Okay, no, their enemies did not...
Abwehr is the military intelligence. So it's not the secret service is SS, yeah? So...
yeah, Abwehr is the military. You're right, I'm sorry.
Abwehr is the military intelligence, yes. Go on.
Yeah, okay. And then their enemies did not engage in the same tactics. Like they didn't, like, Bolsheviks did not like eliminate everyone in the village and like cut off their breasts or whatever, like discussing things these people did. So this is just like, this is a way to excuse the worst, like their actions were so brutal that even German Nazis were like, dude, you guys are sick.
Massive resistance against the Polish authorities in Western Ukraine, as well as against the increasing Soviet terror, as revenge for the Soviet-made Holodomor famine.
Okay.
Fuck.
Okay. Okay. Hold on. Let me just. Okay. So the Holodomor, there was definitely a famine, but it was made because what happened is that when they collectivized the land, the kulaks ended up burning all the crops and killing all the draft animals like horses and stuff. So it was made worse by these people. And in fact, the minute that the Soviet Union figured out what was going on, they started shipping more food and stuff like that. And also it comes from the Russian word golod at smrti. And whenever there's a g in Russian, there's a h in Ukrainian. And I don't know, how does the more come from?
The what?
Okay, okay. Holod comes from the golod, but where does the more come from? That part I can't figure out.
No, it's marit, smert.
Smert. Okay. So,
marit, yeah, to basically to starve somebody, and it's also Ukrainian language has this h, which is between g and h. It's h, and it's holodomor. Ukrainian language does have g, but there's only like a handful of words that use that sound. Most of the time it's h. But it's not h. It's not holodomor. It's a holodomor. It should be, but it's anyway. Okay. Anyway, it's
how do you say hunger in Ukrainian?
Hunger.
Yeah, голод. Как по-украински голод?
I'm not holod. I think it's just that holod. Yeah, holod.
Oh, okay.
So it's the same words, just a slightly differently pronounced h.
Yeah, okay, exactly. And then so, but like I said, there was there's this West Virginian agricultural scientist. There was like 10,000 reasons. There was basically first there was a fungus that infected the crops, and then it was and then there was a drought. The same famine happened in Kazakhstan, and of course the guy who made this
Well, that's the thing. What drives me mental is that it's very easy to... So that, first of all, that year, 32, 33, or first of all, Russia, even going back to like Tsarist, had really shitty agricultural thing, and it's exactly because it was concentrated amongst a few rich people. So and they had fairly regular famines.
Yeah, every about 10 years-ish.
Yeah. So the Soviets basically inherited this shit, and they had to fix it.
Yeah.
And so now this all of a sudden, and the ridiculousness about this particular famine was across all of Soviet Union. It was as far as Siberia. It was in the Caucasus. It was up and down the Volga River.
And also in
It was
China.
in Ukraine. There was also, I think, exactly. So the same years, there was also famine in China, and there were famines like around the other parts in the world. But even in the Soviet Union, it was all over. And what these morons are saying is that just because of some fucking insignificant piece of sliver that was under Poland, because of some Ukrainians who decided to terrorize Polish people, all of a sudden the Soviets just instituted a famine that wiped out 10 million people across Kazakhstan and Siberia and Volga, just out of what? Out of spite? Like, this is so insane. It drives me mental. This thing, I can go on forever. This is nuts.
Continue. Thank you. This is exactly how I feel, so I'm so glad you're going nuts. So continue.
No, this is ridiculous. Like, it doesn't make any fucking sense. The other thing is when people are saying, "Oh yeah, Bolsheviks did it." It's like, why? So that's the other thing. Just ask why. Because nothing engages people like murdering and just basically torturing with hunger 10 million of your people, right? It's like, why the fuck would the new regime that wants to have a buy-in from the people, why would it institute a man-made fucking famine against its own people that it's trying to get a buy-in from? It makes no sense. No sense.
And then, like I said, the guy who actually popularized this in the West is Gareth Jones. And the day before, he was on a plane with Hitler and Goebbels. So, and he's the one who, and then he sold it to this other guy, Lee Ivy, who was also on the Nazi payroll. So this like 100% Nazi propaganda. And back then, even like if you look at 1932 newspapers, in fact, I had a debate with somebody, what's his name? Bad Empanada. And he actually accused us of using a Stalinist source when it was the Financial Times. So this was like retconned after World War II in order to say we were not so bad for committing the worst genocide known to man because Stalin was mean to us, basically, right?
Which killed millions of Ukrainians. An OUN member shot a Soviet diplomat in Poland. A year later, the OUN also shot the Polish Interior Minister. Several OUN members, including 25-year-old Stepan Bandera, were captured by the Polish government.
I wonder why.
They were first sentenced to death, but later their punishment was commuted to life imprisonment. Though imprisoned by Poland, Bandera became a star among the nationalist youth.
How?
The new Soviet regime also feared the OUN and assassinated many of its prominent members.
Why? Because they were being directed by the Nazi Germany at this point. In fact, so on June 22nd, 1941, when Barbarossa began with their like blitzkrieg, they had actually had an agreement with these Banderaites that they would start like an internal, kind of like an internal like terror. And so, and then basically they did. And so, yes, the Soviets feared them because they were disgusting people who committed the most disgusting kinds of genocide. So like a little after, like in July 9th,
I would say, I would even like rephrase it, because there's a different version of it. It's like you don't have to fear them to try to hunt them down, because they're fucking terrorists. And they kill civilians. They kill civilians, and that's well established. That's a well established fact. They were killing Ukraine. In fact, okay. So so here is a part of the of the color commentary on this. So I've learned recently that one of my great grandparents from the center of Ukraine, so it's basically my mom's grandfather, when she would visit him, like he was telling her stories, and he would say, like during the wartime, when the Germans came, they were in their village, they were hiding things because they knew that Germans would steal stuff, like take food. When the Bandera people came, they were hiding themselves because they knew that they would be shot.
Shot if they're lucky.
Yeah, so that's a difference of how Bandera people and the Germans treated like normal Ukrainians. I can also read you, like, there is a famous Ukrainian poet who was possibly killed by the KGB, right? So he was very nationalistic. So you could not, basically, you couldn't accuse him of being a Russian propagandist.
Yeah.
He wrote a poem against the Bandera people, and he was saying, like, basically, you fuckers, you destroyed Ukraine, and you were basically licking the boots of the Germans, and basically you're disgusting. And he was saying in his poem, like, we had to get the Moskals to help us to fight you. So that's a Ukrainian nationalist poet was anti-Bandera, and he was saying that, like, we had to, like, for us, Moskals were better than you motherfuckers. Basically,
yeah. So, like, right after they came into power, they did the Lviv program where they would just, like, they actually, I've written an article about this where they, like, they literally stabbed like women in the, you know what. So being shot by them is actually lucky. And then they also did the Babi Yar massacre where they just killed 45,000 people, like, just blood. And they killed so much that the blood seeped into the water table, and then the next day, if you were to turn on the tap, blood would come out of the tap.
There is I will send you, but it's in Russian. So there is
I can translate later.
A video of the last surviving witness of Babi Yar.
Oh, I know that. Yeah, send it to me and I'll put subtitles on it.
Yeah. So and he was basically saying that they were afraid of Ukrainians more than they were afraid. So of the collaborating Ukrainians, they were afraid of the collaborating Ukrainians, of the Banderites, more than they were afraid of Germans.
Oh, well, yeah, and like I said, Himmler received over. Not Himmler. Is that him? Who was the guy who's charged of the Gestapo? Yeah, Himmler. He received complaints from German officers talking about these Banderites because they were so cruel and disgusting.
OUN leader Yevhen Konovalets was killed by Soviet agents in 1938. Some OUN members started demanding more action against the Soviets. The OUN eventually split, and Bandera took the lead of one of the two wings. Soon after the start of World War II, Ukrainian nationalists saw their chance to strike. Bandera's movement made a deal with Nazi intelligence.
Okay, well, come on. Here they just mentioned that they're Nazi collaborators. Like, come on.
Created special units under the command of Roman Shukevich. Together with the Nazis, they entered Lviv.
Okay. I've actually written an article about Roman Shukevich because in Canada they have, like, many monuments to him as a victim of communism. So yes, he's a victim of communism, but he totally deserves that because he eliminated, like he was like the Nightingale Battalion was so vicious. In Belarus, they eliminated over like 600 villages in Belarus. Like, they would just torch them and kill them. And so come and see if you can. And that's these people are who is responsible for it, the Nightingale Battalion.
And there's also an SS division Galician that was made up of the. I hope they get to it because these guys also get glorified, and there are yearly celebrations in Lvov for them.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. I've not personally, but I've seen videos of them, and also not just Lvov, in Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia.
Well, they have not Galician, yes, but they have their own. So all
their own SS, Waffen SS.
Yeah, so all the Baltic states had there were like 3 SS divisions in the Baltics, called the Baltic Legions. So it was one made up. I think there were 2 Latvian ones and one Estonian. I don't know about Lithuanian. So and by all accounts, they were also, they were quite vicious. My grandma, who was she was in Odessa during the war. Odessa was not part of the Ukrainian nationalists weren't there. but they were Hungarians, and she said that they were always
And
more afraid
Romanians.
of. Yeah, she said that with Romanians you could agree to things, but Hungarians were by far the more vicious
Oh yeah,
of the
collaborators.
three.
Yeah. Okay, so I also shared my article that I wrote about Roman Shukavich. So let me just mention some highlights. Let's see. Okay, so let's see. Where do we want to start? Hundreds of Ukrainians were recruited by the Avwer. Okay, so as soon as Bandera started his independent whatever crap, the cathedral Ukrainian state, this was the speech that was given. The restored Sabernoya Ukraina will cooperate closely with National Socialist Greater Germany, which under Adolf Hitler creates a new order in Europe and the world and helps the Ukrainian people break free from the Moscow occupation. Long live
democracy!
Long live the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. May the guide of OUN Stepan Bandera live on. And then they went on to, you guys can read the rest. It was disgusting. And yeah, they basically, he ended up, so basically they used Hitler, the US's struggle against, US's extermination campaign against the First Nations as a model for what to do in Eastern Ukraine and Belarus.
This same day, Banderites proclaimed the restoration of the Ukrainian state. But it also marked one of the darkest events in the history of Western Ukraine. As the Germans were approaching Lviv, the Soviets murdered hundreds of political prisoners in their jails, Ukrainians, Poles, and Jews.
Okay, that is bullshit.
Yep.
Okay, so now they're saying that because the Soviets allegedly murdered political prisoners, they went and like stabbed pregnant women and cut out their baby. Like, there's nothing that the Soviets can do that can justify the Lviv program, in my opinion. Okay.
After entering the city, the Germans blamed so-called Jewish Bolsheviks for those atrocities. Some Ukrainian nationalists supported this idea.
So yeah,
many Ukrainians took...
Sure, Jews just killed a whole bunch of their own people because evil.
Okay, and then
none of that fucking makes any. None of that makes any sense.
Yeah, and if you like read Alexander yeah, he actually goes on a counting thing where he says the very first Bolshevik government, 1 Russian, 1 Georgian, and 17 Jews, and he like, and then if you read Timothy Schneider's Bloodlands, you'll see that like some of the things is like Stalin promoted Jews as heads of the police.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of either of those. So I
I read it to debunk it, and so then what they're basically twisting it, saying that Jews brought the Holocaust upon themselves by succeeding.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And also like this, I honestly of all the Russophobic like anti-Bolshevik stuff, I've never even heard of this stuff. So that Bolsheviks killed Poles and Jews in Lvov while retreating, like I hear about it for the first time, and I've heard
That's
a lot
bullshit.
of shit thrown at so that doesn't like it just sounds like made up shit.
Yeah, and if you understand how Barbarossa happened, they just came and went boom, boom, boom. Like, and I've tweeted this out. Like, Kyiv was totally like they just went and like carpet bombed everything. So like there would not even be time for them to go kill political prisoners. So this is just total bullshit.
Yeah.
Part in the ensuing pogroms or violent riots that left many Jews killed or injured.
That left many Jews. I like the passive tense. Yeah.
Yeah. Who killed them? I don't know. This is pogroms happened.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism by many nationalists was political, as they believed that many Jews were loyal to the Communist Party.
I wonder why they were loyal to people who didn't murder them.
Yep.
Complicatedly, there are some documented cases of OUN members saving Jews as well.
So much.
In the end, the
That's
OUN...
bullshit. Okay, there was that's totally bullshit. Like they probably like if they saved one or two collaborators, sure, but that's totally total bullshit. Okay.
Goal to free Ukraine did not align with the Nazi plans for the occupied territories. Refusing to give up on the idea of Ukraine's independence, Bandera and his fellows were jailed by the Gestapo. OUN leaders spent years in the Nazi concentration.
Okay. No. Okay. So in the area of concentration camps, there are places where Jewish and communist prisoners were picking up rocks and having a daily death rate of 10% and starving and being used for medical experimentation. But then there was also another area where there was officers, and then there was a third area where they were training. So what they did was they, when Shukeyevich went to this concentration camp, they trained him and other militants and released them back to form the Nachtigall and Roland battalions to go murder more. So this is, yeah.
So again, if you look at actually, what happens, so you're totally right. I've heard a slightly different version. I've heard that there was a kind of a white collar where they were allowed. So Bandera was allowed visits from his wife, and he was basically coordinating all the stuff with the OUN from there. He was getting visitors from OUN as well. Yeah, but Bandera was imprisoned in the concentration camp. Sure, sounds bad, but then actually, as you said, exactly not that happened. And furthermore, he was an agent of the Abwehr in the lead up to the war. So it wasn't like Germans came and then they decided to make a deal. It's no, that was prepared. They were making a deal before. He was on the payroll. Second, he later on gets released or whatever from this place to go again and do his shit in Ukraine. So it's are we? So Ukrainians are saying that no, he was against Germans, he was against everybody. Look, he was in the concentration camp. It's no.
And then he gets released and gets political asylum in Munich, of course, where he gets killed. Hey, welcome back. I just said that, and then he was, and then later after the war, he gets political asylum in Munich.
Yeah, exactly. So it's ooh, yeah, he was against Germans. Sure.
Yeah.
Rubbish.
Camps. As the Nazis took Kyiv, hundreds of OUN members were arrested or killed for trying to establish their own state.
Okay. No, that's bullshit. The OUN members were not killed in Babi Yar. Babi Yar was mostly Jews and communist officials. That's just bullshit there. Okay.
Died in Auschwitz, and another was shot by the Gestapo. The OUN soon turned to guerrilla warfare, creating the Ukrainian insurgent army known as UPA, an enemy of both the Soviet and...
Okay, who created this army? Reinhard Gehlen. He was the one who set up who was paid by the CIA to set up this network. So even then they were supported by Nazis. I can't hear you.
No, I'm not saying anything. I'm just laughing. I was just what can
Nazi
I say?
regimes. The UPA also saw the Polish resistance and their supporters as enemies, remembering the years of occupation and
The Polish
oppression.
resistance against the Nazis.
Another
of course.
dark event in Ukrainian history is the massacre of Poles in Volhynia in 1943, with some historians placing the number of victims at up to 90,000. Poles killed Ukrainians in retaliation, though with fewer victims.
Okay, so first of all, killing Nazis isn't okay. Killing, there's actually a statue about this. There's a picture where they hang up dead children. They literally hung children up with meat hooks. So it is not okay to kill children with meat hooks. So that's the whole context.
Or anything else, to be fair. Let's it's not okay to kill children. Let's just draw the line there.
Yeah. Okay, it's not okay to kill children, but these people were killing children by hanging them up.
They were especially gruesome. Fucking and the thing is about the Volhynia massacre, what they're not saying, they're saying Poles killed. These were predominantly women and children.
Yeah.
So the estimates go up to 100,000 of predominantly women and children. So that needs to be said.
Yeah. Okay.
At the time, Bandera was in a German prison, while the Ukrainian insurgent army was led by Shukeyevich. Bandera was freed from prison in 1944, went into exile, and was assassinated by the Soviets in 1959. The Ukrainian national idea...
Who freed him?
Oh, Nazis! And then where did he go into exile? Munich.
Yeah. And by the way, what happened to the Nachtigall and what happened to SS Galician, which was made up of the
Canada?
Yeah, no, they were running around. They were even like during the war. They were running around. They even went to fight Serbs in Yugoslavia. They were doing shit there, and yeah, then they buggered off to Canada, of course,
Yeah.
and some to the United States.
Yep.
But like, why we're not talking about that? Did that not happen?
Exactly. And then, like, basically, they did a lot of like acts of terrorism against like all over Yugoslavia. They also did some like Gladio-like acts.
Survived decades of Soviet oppression thanks to the dissident movement. From the start, Soviet propaganda demonized Ukrainian nationalists, manipulating, lying, and distorting facts. Several instances of Soviet soldiers conducting false flag operations as supposed Ukrainian nationalists were recorded. The Soviet goals were to vilify nationalist leaders to diminish their...
Come on, okay. They didn't really need to do false flag because Ukrainian nationalists did all the gory terrorism by them. Like, literally, you didn't need to do it. Like, they did it by themselves.
I know all of these things. There's so much evidence of that happening,
including like in their own memoirs. Like they confess to doing this.
Look, if you just gonna read you the Ten Commandments, the original version of the Ten Commandments, a Decalogue of the Ukrainian nationalists, which was one of the founding documents. It was put together by Stepan Lenkavsky in 1929, and Dmitro Dontsov. So the Dontsov that they mentioned was also got involved. So number one, you will attain a Ukrainian state or perish fighting for it. You will not allow anyone to tarnish your people's reputation or honor. Remember the great days, blah blah blah. Be proud. Okay, avenge the deaths of the great knights. I'm not sure who those are, but whatever. Do not discuss this with whomever you can. Okay, fine. You will not hesitate to commit even the greatest crime if the good of the cause demands it. So, okay, so that's park that. Number 8, with hatred and deceit, you will receive the enemies of your nation.
Yeah.
Number 9, neither pleading nor threats, torture or death will force you to reveal secrets. And number 10, you will strive to expand the strength, fame, wealth, and area of the Ukrainian state, even through the enslavement of foreigners.
Yeah. So, yeah. And so here, here the Soviet propaganda is 100% true. If you look at like even German, everything we know about the Nazis come from the Nazis' records of it. Like you can really see them like actually sending like money. If you just read the Nuremberg trial transcripts, everything is like established that these people were definitely Nazi collaborators.
Their support and the importance of Ukrainian nationalist movements as a whole. At the same time, the Soviets jailed and killed anyone who tried to spread national ideas. It betrayed all of those who believed in Ukrainian nationhood as traitors, collaborators, and puppets of Western intelligence. Modern Russia has eagerly adopted this stance.
Because
as
it's
the
true.
Euromaidan revolution prompted a revival of Ukrainian national feeling, Moscow invaded Ukraine and resurrected propaganda myths about it, calling Ukrainians Nazis and Banderites. Russia's latest colonial war further fueled Ukrainian nationalism despite decades of Russification. In modern Ukraine, Bandera and his movement are mostly embraced for their fight for the Ukrainian nation and statehood, rather than for their radical nationalism in particular. However, Ukrainians today have new...
I've seen these people also put out extremely hateful anti-Semitic thoughts, and they're definitely, the hate is definitely there. Do you agree?
Yes. Also, it is it is true that not all Ukrainian are Nazis. I'm Ukrainian. I'm not a Nazi.
Obviously, no one says all Ukrainian.
Yeah, and that's the thing. They're trying to portray like even the Russians don't say that, right?
No.
But the reality of it is that there is like even when Hitler came to power, also not all Germans were Nazis.
Yeah, but who had the guns?
They weren't. Exactly. But in this particular case, they did play a key role in the coup in 2014. They did take the power, and they had guns. And since then, even when they were not like the far right radicals, even when they were not in the parliament, they didn't have to. Is the parliament kept passing all the things that were on their agenda. So
and they
when
had
you
the
have
guns,
turns out you don't have to be in parliament. So the fact that they're not in parliament is actually not anything. And then if we're saying that, there are maybe there's like no more than 5% that are neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Yes, but Ukraine, the pre-war population was like 35 million. 5% of that is several million. And then, if you have those several million with guns, that's a significantly strong base from which you can do whatever the fuck you want. So,
exactly.
And yes, unfortunately, people are taking up all the, all of this stuff because propaganda. So there's like a 24-hour marathon of just the same shit on TV, and people do buy into that. Then, as I said, it was already starting 30 years ago when I was at school, and it escalated significantly from 2014.
Let me tell you about. Hold on. Let me tell you about this textbook I found in Lugansk. It was like a newly liberated or whatever that had the Ukrainians run away. So it was an alphabet book. I just don't remember what A was for, but B. This is for like 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. They were like B for Bandera, and they wrote like a little poem, and I was just,
And so that's the thing. Then you brainwash the kids from the young age. And sure, no doubt, like people would come in and say, Bandera, yeah, sure, good. Yeah. But it does not make it any. Just the fact that you've brainwashed your population starting from the kindergarten and then school all the way, for 13 years of school. Just because you've done that does not actually change the fact that Bandera was a motherfucking Nazi.
Yeah.
And all of that should really be expunged from memory. And should be taught in the proper way, like what they did. Even though I have questions about whatever the fuck is happening with Germany, but at least they did manage to denazify Germany to a certain extent, where it was we that was wrong. We understand that was wrong, and we take on responsibility. Ukrainian and to like not only Ukrainians, nobody else went through that.
Croatians, no, that's why. Like basically, hold on. They just basically they rewrote history to make it seem like it was the big bad Germans who were so evil and everyone was innocent. But no, the Croatians were actually really disgusting.
Ustasha.
In fact, Ustasha. There was the Romanians, Hungarians. Every single country had. In fact, 2 million.
Cross.
Yeah. In fact, 2 million French people volunteered to do Barbarossa. And in fact, they were the ones who were protecting Hitler's bunker at the end. So every single bloody country Russia even had over 1 million, every single bloody country has its collaborators, without which the Nazis could not have done a single thing.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another thing. It's like, if we're talking about critical thinking, it's like, why do you think that there is one building in Stalingrad that the Nazis couldn't take, in like, I don't know, some ridiculous amount, like 100.
I read an article, but the Pavlov's house, it lasted longer than all of the European countries.
Yeah, exactly. And so the question is, why do you think that Hitler managed to basically subjugate all of Europe in such a short period of time? Is it because Hitler was so powerful, like he was godlike and he could just do it, or B, maybe that there was a lot of willingness on behalf of the Europeans to actually go along? I lean towards B, because that just feels like more sensible answer to me.
Exactly. So if you look at how long France put up a fight in World War I, and then right before World War II, what happened is that they had Leon Blum, who was Jewish. He was also a socialist, and workers were getting a lot of rights. And the elites in France, like, basically it was advantageous to them to like surrender to the Nazis because, well, worker rights gets erased the minute the Nazis take power.
Yeah.
Heroes were showing courage against a new Russian invasion. And despite Moscow's propaganda claims, Ukrainian mainstream political and social spheres do not embrace the far right.
Doesn't matter. Okay. So this was very okay, so yeah, this was like a very bad attempt at propaganda, but I'm glad we are able to debunk this because unfortunately in the West they have a tendency of like labeling any truth that they don't like as Russian propaganda, right? Okay. So thank you for joining us for our stream.
By the way, just let's be clear. We're not saying that Russians do not have propaganda.
No.
Everybody does.
Yes.
That's not the point. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is just this particular thing, it so happens that a lot of stuff that Russians are saying is actually way closer to the truth than whatever the West is saying.
Exactly.
That's it. So there are other situations when this might not be the case. But on this particular topic, it just so happens to be the case.
Because the Russian interests align with basically saying the truth.
In this, it works for them. That's why they do it. So it's not because they're nice, but in this particular case, it will. But it is an objective truth. And whatever the West is doing, on the other hand, is actually whitewashing the Nazis. That's it. And they've been doing it, as you mentioned, the MI6 in like 1946. They financed and organized what's called the anti-Bolshevik bloc of nations, and the key member there was OUN, so the organization
Yaroslav
of Ukrainian
Stetsko.
nationalists. Yeah. So, and they've been funding and basically, supporting the terrorist activities against the Bolsheviks, all like in Ukraine, but also up and down the Eastern Bloc. So it's like they've been collaborating with the Nazis since the end of the World War II.
Yeah. And if you read our article about West Germany, we'll see like West Germany actually had a higher concentration of Nazis in power than Nazi judges. You just read our article, but yeah. And so and the West has been doing a lot to like muddy the waters. And if you like look at the economics and how the people used to live before, you will understand that basically it was a way to restore whatever aristocratic structure there was before World War I. Like that was the Nazis' main goal, was to like stratify power, like keep people oppressed. Anyways, with that, can you plug your website?
Yeah, it's called business-games.ai, and there's lots of stuff you could you could subscribe. There are everything that I do currently for this season I do for free. You can support me by subscribing to one of the tiered payment things. You will not get anything that you don't get for free, at least not now. Some historical stuff, there's something that's paid only, that might be of interest to like people in the corporate sector, but not only. There's some good material on like strategy and experimentation. This stuff, there are articles and there are podcast episodes. Podcasts are available. The free version of podcast is available everywhere if you do subscribe for money. And again, there are several tiers, but they all give you the same. So it's more like donation than anything. You get a private RSS feed, and that and I try to actually also put up not recently, but eventually I will, to put up transcripts of all the podcasts as well on the website. So that's there. Check it out. We'll get a lot of. I do have some takedowns of New York Times. There's one article in the New York Times who shifted the way that they cover the Donbas conflict from 2014, 2015. Like all the way up to 2022, and then all of a sudden on the February 24th, 2022, they completely changed how they cover. So I give examples about that, and it's like it's really when you again there is no Russian propaganda because it's just New York Times articles. It's just this is what they used to write, this is what they write now. See the difference.
Yep.
The things like that. I do write about Holodomor. I do write because I am I'm an economist, and I've got a marketing qualification and do work a lot with brand management. I actually kind of analyze in one article. I analyze the even including Holodomor, I analyze it from a brand manager's point of view, and I basically refer to Goebbels, who I think was an excellent brand manager. Like he was literally, it's just marketing 101. Everything he was doing is so great. I just analyze that and how it relates to the things that people throw at Russia. So yeah, there's that material. There will be more.
Okay, and if you're new to the channel, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit the bell. It's going to help us a lot. With that, смерти фашизму, свобода народу.
Смерть фашизму, свобода народу.